What if one of the most iconic disasters in modern history wasn't an accident? What if the Titanic, the ship that launched with kings, bankers, and visionaries on board, was more than just a marvel of engineering? What if beneath the polished brass, the grand staircases, and the promise of being unsinkable, there was a hidden plan? A ship praised around the world disappears on its very first voyage. The richest and most influential men in America dead in a single night. An identical sister ship already damaged, waiting in the shadows. And one of the most powerful financiers in history, he just happened to cancel his trip at the last minute. For over a century, the story has stayed the same. But behind the tragedy, behind the official record, behind the frozen silence at the bottom of the Atlantic, there are whispers. Whispers of a switch. Whispers of a cover up. Whispers of a financial empire that quietly emerged from the wreckage, stronger than ever. And the question is no longer what sank the Titanic. The question is, was that even the Titanic at all? The year is 1912. The world is changing. Technology is booming. Empires are colliding. And somewhere beneath the surface, a plan is already in motion. We're about to dive into one of the most enduring conspiracy theories of the 20th century. A story built on conflicting records, strange coincidences, missing lifeboats, and a chain of decisions that don't quite add up. Did the Titanic really go down that night? Was it an insurance scam? A banking assassination? Or just a series of human failures rewritten by grief and time? This episode doesn't just ask the questions, it follows them, past the headlines, into the blueprints, through the wreckage, and straight into the heart of the myth. Because if there's one thing we've learned on this channel, it's that the truth and the story we've been told aren't always the same thing. You've heard of the Titanic, but you've never heard this. The RMS Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of progress, of power, of mankind's belief that we had finally conquered nature. It was the crown jewel of an empire in motion, the largest moving object ever built by human hands. Advertised as unsinkable, launched with champagne and fanfare, loaded with the wealthiest elites on earth, rubbing shoulders with third-class families chasing a dream that would last just 4 days. On April 14th, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. By the early hours of April 15th, the unthinkable happened. The unsinkable ship sank. Over 1,500 people died in one of the deadliest maritime disasters in modern history. The official story? A tragic accident. A miscalculation of speed. Too few lifeboats. No foul play. Just a cold night and bad luck. But the moment that ship disappeared beneath the waves, so did a whole world of unanswered questions. Because what if it wasn't just an accident? What if the iceberg was just the cleanest explanation history could offer? What if the people who died on board weren't just passengers, but part of a deeper story that doesn't quite add up? What if that ship didn't just carry dreams and diamonds, but names history would later obsess over for all the wrong reasons? And here's where things get strange, because just beneath the surface of this tragedy are stories that don't match the headlines, documents that don't line up, names that should have been on board but weren't, and institutions that rose from the ashes of the Titanic's wreckage more powerful than ever. The Titanic may have hit an iceberg, but that might not be the full story. And if we follow the trail far enough, we might just uncover how a single tragedy helped reshape the modern world, whether by design or by consequence. They say history is written by the survivors. But what if the ones who didn't survive were the point all along? Let's start with something you've probably heard. JP Morgan, the American banking titan who helped finance the Titanic through his shipping conglomerate, the International Mercantile Marine Company, canceled his voyage at the last minute. He had reserved a lavish suite on Titanic's maiden voyage. Clothes were packed, staff were ready. The press even reported on his scheduled arrival. And then, poof, Morgan bails. The official excuse? He wanted to stay in France a few extra days to enjoy the art collection at a spa. But here's the kicker. Multiple close associates of Morgan were on board, and they died. Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a mining fortune. Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in the world. All three were powerful men with financial influence. And in later conspiracy circles, they were labeled as opponents of the Federal Reserve, even though no historical record confirms they ever publicly opposed it. JP Morgan, on the other hand, he supported the central banking idea. Now, it's easy to say this is coincidence. After all, these men were part of the same elite class. But when one man conveniently avoids disaster, while other titans of industry vanished beneath the waves, you've got to ask, was the iceberg just an ending, or the start of a story we've been misreading for over a century? Let's talk about the Titanic's twin, the RMS Olympic. Titanic's nearly identical sister ship was launched a year earlier. Same dimensions, same layout, same design, but the Olympic had a problem. It had already been damaged in a collision with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The repair costs were astronomical, and there was talk that the White Star Line's insurance wouldn't cover it. That's when the ship switch theory sails in. The idea? The Olympic was disguised as the Titanic, sailed out under a new name, and was deliberately sunk to collect the insurance money. And then there's the behavior of the crew. There were 20 lifeboats on board, less than half the number needed for all the passengers. But even those weren't fully used. Lifeboats launched half empty. Some crew members refused to let people on board. Others seemed panicked and confused, as if they didn't expect to be in a real emergency. Even more bizarre, some survivors claimed the emergency drills were canceled before departure. The ship was warned about ice ahead multiple times, but never slowed down. So here's the question. Why were so many standard procedures ignored? Why was this ship rushed into service? And why did so many powerful people end up dead, while the man who bankrolled the entire voyage stayed home? The Titanic was called unsinkable, but here's what they don't tell you. It had a sister, and not just any sister, an older one, nearly identical, the RMS Olympic. She launched in 1910, nearly a full year before Titanic, and she looked almost exactly the same. Same length, same width, same deck layout, same number of funnels. To the average observer, the two ships were practically twins. But here's where things start getting weird. In September of 1911, while on only her fifth voyage, the Olympic collided with a British warship HMS Hawke. The Olympic's rear starboard side, the right side if you're facing forward, was torn open. The damage was massive. According to shipyard logs and court documents, Olympic lost a propeller blade, had a warped keel, and took structural damage to her hull. And here's the kicker. The insurance claim was denied. Because the Royal Navy blamed Olympic for the crash, White Star Line couldn't recover the cost of the damage. And the company that owned both Olympic and Titanic was International Mercantile Marine, run by JP Morgan, which was now in serious financial trouble. So, here's the theory. What if the Titanic that sank wasn't the Titanic? What if the damaged Olympic was quietly swapped with her newer sister ship? The idea? They patch up the Olympic just enough to float, rebrand her with Titanic's nameplates, send her out on a one-way voyage, sink her intentionally, collect full insurance on the brand new Titanic, and write off the damaged Olympic quietly behind the scenes. Let's start with the alleged visual evidence, because this is where the theory really leans hard on surface level details. If you look at pre-launch photos of Titanic taken in Belfast, she has 14 portholes on the forward section of her sea deck. But when Titanic left Southampton on her maiden voyage in April of 1912, she suddenly had 16 portholes. Guess which ship had 16? The Olympic. Now, here's the problem. While it was once claimed no changes were made, Shipyard records from March of 1912 actually confirmed those extra portholes were part of a last-minute design update. Next, survivor testimonies. Some survivors, including crew who had previously worked on Olympic, claimed the layout of certain corridors and stairwells felt off. Like the ship was familiar, but not exactly right. In 1996, naval historian Bruce Beveridge documented key layout discrepancies based on original Olympic and Titanic blueprints. Some include slight differences in B-deck corridor positioning. Olympic's promenade deck was enclosed in places where Titanic's was originally open, and minor fixture placements and railing styles inconsistent with Titanic's final design. Small changes? Maybe. But when added together, they tell a strange story. In the 1990s, diver and author Robin Gardner released photographs taken from the wreck, specifically close-up shots of the propeller shaft. On Titanic's original shipyard blueprints, her propeller was engraved with the build number 401. Olympic's was engraved with 400. Guess what number appears faintly on the propeller shaft of the wreck? 400. The claim that the propeller shows a 400 is unverified. No official wreck survey, Ballard, Cameron, or National Geographic has ever confirmed that number. And if that wasn't enough, Gardner claimed multiple Harland and Wolff shipyard workers later confided that the ships were indeed switched, but they were under strict secrecy orders due to the involvement of high-level financiers. Titanic carried just 20 lifeboats, not nearly enough for the 2,200 plus passengers on board. But here's what's strange. Some lifeboats were launched barely half full. Crew members hesitated to fill them. No lifeboat drill was conducted on the day of the sinking. Why? Well, the theory suggests they expected a soft landing. The plan wasn't to drown people, it was to stage a believable accident, get everyone into boats, and have the nearby ship, the Californian, pick them up. But that didn't happen. The SS Californian was positioned just 10 miles from Titanic's location. She was stopped. Ice warnings claimed she was waiting for daylight. Titanic's crew fired distress rockets. The Californian saw them. They didn't respond. Why? Some speculate the ship's wireless operator had been ordered off duty. Others claim the crew had been instructed not to intervene until receiving specific clearance. But this isn't just about corporate damage control, because the switch theory leads directly to something even darker, and the real reason so many powerful men didn't make it off that ship. When the Titanic went down, it took more than passengers with it. It may have taken the last major obstacle to a financial revolution. Here's what we know. In 1910, 2 years before Titanic set sail, a secret meeting was held at Jekyll Island, Georgia. A group of powerful bankers and politicians gathered behind closed doors to design something that would change the world: the Federal Reserve System. Among them, J.P. Morgan, Paul Warburg, Senator Nelson Aldrich. every one of them tied to elite banking dynasties, including Rothschild-linked financial houses. But the plan wasn't universally loved. It's often claimed that several wealthy financiers like Guggenheim, Strauss, and Astor opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve. All three were on board the Titanic. All three died in the sinking. And what happened after their deaths? The Federal Reserve Act was passed in December of 1913, which pushed through Congress during the holiday recess with minimal opposition. A financial system some believe they would have opposed became law. It's often pointed out that three of America's wealthiest men, who some claim opposed central banking, just happened to be on a ship owned by Morgan, the man who funded and organized the Federal Reserve meetings and canceled his own trip last minute. Too on the nose? Well, let's go deeper. Morgan's reason for not sailing was reportedly illness. Yet just days later, he was spotted in good health, shopping in France. The same France where many of his European Rothschild business connections were based. Coincidence? Maybe. Is this airtight proof of collusion? No. But let's ask a harder question. If the Federal Reserve was a foregone conclusion, why was its creation cloaked in so much secrecy? Why the private trains to Jekyll Island? Why the code names? Why the urgency to push it through when America's financial elite had just died? Sometimes the timing tells you more than the headline. And in this case, the Titanic may not have been about a ship. It may have been about a clean slate. That's what the theory claims, that you can't fight a system if you're sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic. When the Titanic sent out its distress signals, it wasn't alone. Just 10 miles away, a steamship sat quietly in the icy night. The SS Californian. It wasn't moving, it wasn't in trouble, and by all accounts, it saw everything. The Californian's crew spotted rockets firing into the sky. They watched lights flicker from the dark silhouette of a massive ocean liner, and they did nothing. Why? Here's the official explanation. The Californian had stopped for the night. Ice warnings had come in earlier, and the captain, Stanley Lord, ordered the ship to shut down its engines and wait for daylight. The wireless operator? Off duty, asleep. Titanic's frantic Morse code messages never got through. That's the story. But here's where it starts to crack. The rockets Titanic fired weren't subtle. They weren't a polite flashlight in the dark. They were distress flares, fired one after another into the sky as passengers screamed and lifeboats splashed into the freezing ocean. Some say the crew couldn't have mistaken them for fireworks, that they had to know what they were seeing, but the official inquiry found otherwise. According to testimony in the British inquiry, crew members saw the flares and notified Captain Lord, but he chose not to act. And the wireless operator? He turned off the radio just minutes before Titanic's first distress call came through. Minutes. Now, maybe that's just a tragic overlap. Maybe it's a catastrophic example of poor judgment and bad luck. Or maybe it was something else. It's a question conspiracy theorists love to ask. Why was the Californian so close, yet didn't respond? Was it just bad luck, or something more? Some have suggested the Californian was supposed to be part of a controlled rescue operation. That if the Titanic was being deliberately sunk, whether as part of an insurance switch or financial plot, or something else, the plan included nearby pickup. The theory goes, the crew expected a soft evacuation, everyone in lifeboats, quick pickup, tragedy avoided, insurance collected, history rewritten. But it's a claim with no real evidence behind it. But something went wrong. Maybe the timing was off. Maybe orders changed. Maybe someone got cold feet or hot orders. And so the Californian just watched. In later interviews, Captain Lord defended his choices. He claimed the flares didn't seem urgent. He believed that the ship they saw was smaller, closer, and definitely not Titanic. But survivors later testified that they saw a ship on the horizon. They watched it sit there as the Titanic slowly vanished beneath the waves. This wasn't a search and rescue, this was a ghost ship. And by the time the Carpathia arrived hours later, too late for hundreds of lives, it was clear. Whatever the Californian was waiting for, it never came. Some called it incompetence, others apathy. For those who believe in the switch theory, the Californian is seen as Plan A. But again, there's no documentation to back that up. And when Plan A failed, people died. If the Titanic was a tragedy and the Olympic was a problem, then what was the Britannic? Because here's what most people forget. The Titanic had two sister ships, and both of them, Olympic and Britannic, ended up in catastrophic accidents. Titanic in 1912, Olympic damaged and decommissioned, and Britannic, she sank in 1916 during World War I. Let's walk through it. The HMHS Britannic was originally designed to be the most advanced ship in the world. After Titanic's sinking, they gave Britannic extra safety features, stronger hull, more lifeboats, reinforced bulkheads. The ship was supposed to be unsinkable 2.0. But during World War I, she was repurposed as a hospital ship. No weapons, just nurses, medics, and wounded soldiers. And on November 21st, 1916, she was cruising through the Aegean Sea near the Greek island of Kea when she hit something. An explosion tore through the hull. Within 55 minutes, the Britannic, larger, stronger, and allegedly safer than Titanic, sank beneath the waves. Officially, it was blamed on a German mine. But that's not the whole story. Here's what's weird. Although some claimed the route was considered safe, German naval records and underwater surveys later confirmed it was indeed mined. The explosion occurred near the same part of the ship where Titanic was first struck, a suspiciously similar failure. And most importantly, the explosion wasn't the only problem. The watertight doors didn't fail. They were opened by medical staff trying to move patients quickly. A tragic case of heroism backfiring under pressure. Now, let's ask the question that gets you kicked out of polite history circles. What if the Britannic wasn't just sunk? Some have speculated, without solid evidence, that Britannic was more than just a casualty of war, that it was removed to tie up loose ends. There's a theory, quiet, controversial, and radioactive. It goes like this. If the Titanic and Olympic were part of a massive insurance or banking conspiracy, then Britannic was naturally a liability. Same shipbuilders, same records, same blueprint secrets. Too many people knew too much. And if any piece of evidence connected Britannic to the original ship switch theory, or if anyone on board knew the truth, it would only be a matter of time before the story unraveled. So what do? You wait for a war. Then, under the cover of chaos, you remove the last surviving sister. But here's the cold part. There were over 1,000 people on that ship. Medical personnel, nurses, wounded soldiers. All told, 30 people died in the sinking. Not as many as Titanic, but it wasn't clean, and it wasn't quiet. And to this day, there's still debate about how fast she went down. But in the chaos of war, even the safest ships can become statistics. Coincidence? Maybe. Before we ask whether JP Morgan could have orchestrated the Titanic tragedy, we need to understand who he really was. Because this wasn't just some banker. This was a man who built monopolies, crushed competition, silenced inventors, and reshaped American industry like a mob boss in a top hat. Let's start with the basics. Morgan didn't just work in finance, he owned it. In the early 1900s, he controlled 1/3 of all US railroads. He oversaw US Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation. And when the panic of 1907 hit and the US economy teetered on collapse, the government didn't call the Fed, they called him. Morgan bailed out the Treasury with $25 million in gold, but it came with strings. He didn't do it for the people, he did it for leverage. He used the crisis to seize control of smaller banks, install his allies across Wall Street, and walk away with more power than ever. He didn't rescue the system, he took it hostage. And when President Theodore Roosevelt tried to take on the monopolies, Morgan said, quote, "If we've done anything wrong, send your man to my man and they can fix it up." Not answer it, fix it, like it was a scheduling conflict. He didn't bend the rules, he bought them, rewrote them, or erased them. Now let's talk about energy, because this is where it gets even darker. Morgan once backed Nikola Tesla, who believed energy could be delivered wirelessly, freely, and cleanly across the globe. Tesla's dream? A global wireless power grid. The Wardenclyffe Tower was the prototype, and Morgan funded it until he realized the electricity couldn't be metered. No wires, no bills, no control. So Morgan pulled the funding, killed the project, blackballed Tesla in the press, and made sure that free energy would never see the light of day. Not because it didn't work, because it didn't make money. Tesla died alone and penniless. Morgan died owning the grid. And when things collapsed around him, Morgan was never underneath the rubble. He was standing at the edge, already holding the deed to what was left behind. Now, none of this makes JP Morgan a villain in the Titanic story by default, but it does make him a man whose shadow touched almost every corner of early 20th century power. Now, back to the Titanic. Titanic sailed, carrying some of the most powerful men in the world: Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, John Jacob Astor. All of them died. And yes, just a year later, the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law. Did Morgan benefit from the system that followed? Absolutely. But did he engineer the tragedy to make it happen? Not according to a single shred of verifiable evidence. And when people say he wouldn't do something like this, the real question is, why wouldn't he? Now that we've entertained the stories, the twists, the turns, the strange coincidences, it's time to ask the only question that really matters. Is any of this actually true? Because on this channel, we don't just chase mystery for mystery's sake. We seek truth with an open mind and a pinch of curious skepticism, but with both feet on the ground. And when the evidence overwhelmingly points in one direction, we call a spade a spade. And in this case, it's overwhelming. Unfortunately for those hoping the conspiracy is real, the answer is simple: no, these theories do not hold up. So let's walk through it, not with speculation, but with receipts. Let's start with the Olympic Switch Theory. This idea hinges on the claim that White Star Line swapped Titanic with her damaged sister ship, the Olympic, to commit insurance fraud. Here's the problem. There was no insurance payout. Titanic was underinsured by over $2 million. White Star Line lost money when the ship went down. If this was a scam, it was the worst one in maritime history. The ships were similar, but they weren't interchangeable. Olympic and Titanic had hundreds of mechanical and structural differences. For instance, Olympic had a straight A deck. Titanic had a partially enclosed one. The promenade decks were laid out differently. The interior decorative elements, light fixtures, furniture, wood paneling, were custom and numbered. And those famous 16 portholes on Titanic's sea deck? That was a late modification, documented in the Shipyard logs in March of 1912, weeks before the maiden voyage. You know where those logs are? The Public Record Office in Belfast. You can go read them. That's not conspiracy, that's blueprints. Now, about that 400 on the propeller shaft, in the wreck. There is no verified image or peer-reviewed analysis confirming that number. That claim comes from Robin Gardner, the man who wrote the Switch Theory book after the fact without independent verification. Wreck surveys by James Cameron, Robert Ballard, and National Geographic all confirm the Titanic's wreck has her original layout, not Olympics. And that build number? When examined in dives, the recovered starboard propeller clearly displays 401, Titanic's true hull number. Now let's tackle the JP Morgan conspiracy, the idea that he orchestrated the deaths of Guggenheim, Astor, and Strauss to push the Federal Reserve Act. This theory didn't even exist until the late 1990s. There is no historical record showing that Astor, Guggenheim, or Strauss opposed the Federal Reserve. None. Not in letters, not in speeches, not in congressional testimony. And the Jekyll Island meeting? That happened in 1910. The legislation had already been designed. The Federal Reserve Act wasn't rammed through after their deaths. It took 3 years of amendments, opposition, and public debate before it passed finally in 1913. Also, JP Morgan didn't control Congress. He didn't write the bill. And more than half the people at that 1910 meeting were already in favor of central banking reforms. The story that these men were assassinated by iceberg is fiction. There's no motive, no proof, no operational logic. In Morgan, he had a chronic medical condition. He stayed in France with documented medical treatment. You know who else canceled that trip? Dozens of prominent names, for completely unrelated reasons. It wasn't a shadow meeting of survivors. It was a big ship with a lot of plans that changed. And what about the SS Californian? It's true, the ship was nearby. It did fail to respond in time. That failure cost lives. But every investigation, including the 1912 British and American inquiries, concluded the same thing. It was negligence, not conspiracy. The wireless operator went to bed. The captain misunderstood the rockets. It was a tragedy of miscommunication, not premeditated silence. Lastly, the Britannic. Yes, it sank, but it was a hospital ship in a war zone. And we have German naval logs confirming mine activity in the exact area it sank. And the watertight doors? They failed because nurses opened them against protocol, trying to evacuate patients. That's not sabotage, that's heroism that backfired. Look, conspiracy theories are fun. We cover lots of them here on this channel. They're compelling. They make us feel like we've pulled back the curtain. But in this particular case, when you look at the records, the dives, the shipyard plans, the insurance filings, the congressional transcripts, you don't find secrets. You find a world-changing tragedy wrapped in myth. Not because the truth was hidden, but because the truth felt too ordinary. And maybe that's the biggest reason these myths survive. Because an iceberg in human error doesn't feel good enough. It doesn't satisfy our need for justice, our meaning, or someone to blame. But history isn't here to satisfy us. It's here to warn us. And in the case of Titanic, the warnings were all ignored long before the ship ever hit the ice. They called it the Ship of Dreams. Titanic wasn't just a vessel, it was a monument, a floating cathedral built for the gods of industry, wealth, and empire. Unsinkable, immaculate, immortal, until it wasn't. For over a century, the story of Titanic has haunted us, not just because it was tragic, but because it felt impossible. A ship that was never supposed to sink did, and that alone has never sat well with us. Because we need more than tragedy. We crave cause, someone to blame, a reason big enough to explain so much loss. But in this case, the truth isn't buried in some dark financial plot or a maritime insurance scheme. It's staring us in the face. What really sank Titanic was the same thing that sinks far too many great endeavors: overconfidence, human error, arrogance, and in a system unwilling to listen to warnings. This wasn't a hit job. It wasn't an illusion. It was a preventable disaster made inevitable by the choices of powerful men who believed the rules didn't apply to them. The ship was traveling too fast. The iceberg warnings were ignored. There weren't enough lifeboats. And the safety protocols were flawed at every level. And those who paid the price were the ones with no say in how the journey was planned. So no, there was no switch, no banking assassination, no deep state maritime ritual. What happened that night was devastating, not because it was a conspiracy, but because it wasn't, because it was human. And that's the part we don't want to sit with, because if it was just greed and error and institutional failure, then this wasn't a story about villains and masterminds. It was a story about us, our systems, our blind spots, our refusal to believe that the most advanced thing we've ever built might not be invincible. And maybe that's the real reason the myths survive, because they give us a villain to chase instead of a mirror to look into. Titanic didn't sink because of a plot. Titanic sank because of a culture that didn't think it could. And if there's a warning in that, it's not to fear the hidden hands behind the curtain. It's to fear the moments when we stop questioning the ones right in front of us. Alright, you made it this far. Thank you. It's easy to get swept up in stories, the iceberg theories, the ship swaps, the sinister bankers in dark rooms. But sometimes the real work isn't in digging deeper into the conspiracy, it's in knowing when to let them go. Because history doesn't always hide its lessons in shadows. Sometimes they're right there, loud, brutal, and ignored. The truth about Titanic doesn't need embellishment. It was a catastrophic failure in design, communication, and leadership. And the price was paid by ordinary people who were promised safety and given none. That's not a cover-up, that's a tragedy. And on this channel, we don't just explore mysteries to get a thrill. We do it because truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. So if this story challenged your assumptions, changed your mind, or made you see things a little differently, that's the work. That's what we're here for. If you want to keep going deeper with us, beyond the myths, into the real bones of history, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I read every single one, and some of them lead to our next investigation. And if you want full, unfiltered episodes, the ones that don't always fit inside YouTube's limits, head over to patreon.com/Divergent Files. That's where the vault stays open. We're also live on the Divergent Files Project podcast, where these stories keep growing in all the directions we're not always allowed to say out loud. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, you are truly appreciated.
So what I'm hearing is no secret underwater alien vault, no insurance scam of the century, and JP Morgan wasn't riding an iceberg like a Bond villain. Cool. Great. I just spent 3 days drawing diagrams of porthole placements. I even made a murder wall, had red string and everything. Anyway, I'm going to go lie down, possibly forever. If anyone needs me, I'll be remote viewing the snack aisle. Tell my theories I loved them.
Like something's off, like there's a shadow just outside the light. They feed you answers, keep you numb, but the questions, man, they don't sleep at night. Turn the dial, crack the code. What if the stories were never just stories? What if the ghosts, the whispers, the things that you dream aren't echoes but memories? We ain't here to play it safe. We ain't here to Lights in the sky moving too fast. Signals in the static calling from the past. Footsteps in an empty room, and a name you don't remember whispered in a voice you never knew. Flip the page, break the lock. What if the past ain't the past at all? What if we're seeing the future and just don't recognize the call? We ain't here to play it safe. We ain't here to close our eyes. Ralph's got the map, Wendell's got the match. So tell me, how deep will you dive? Wake up feeling like you've been here before, like deja vu, ain't just some brain trick, but a warning. Like the past is reaching through the static, trying to remind you before we all go down.